Stephen Daniel, and he'll be talking about the invasive Brachypodium sylvaticum.
Danny, is there a timer?
Oh,
Okay. Hi everyone. So I'm here to tell you about this grass that we found in New York about 5 or 6 years ago, and it's in various places in Eastern North America. It's probably in New England, and that's why I thought this conference would be a place to tell you about it. So maybe you can find it and turn it up, and maybe if it's here, keep it from being a huge problem that it's in some places. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the history in New York, its distribution in North America, some approaches in the Pacific Northwest to managing this thing, which is a Eurasian species. I'll tell you more about that. How did it get to North America? We're not sure, but a little bit about the history of its cultivation and availability, its climate and habitat preferences in its native range, how to identify the thing, and that's all it there in this picture. And is it what's sometimes called an early detection rapid response species? So for invasives, if you get them, and it's a little bit of a conundrum, before they get really bad, when everybody knows it, maybe you can do something about it. But by the time it's widespread, then sometimes it's too late. So that's the protocol. Okay, so a little background story is, this was about, what, 5 or 6 years ago now. I encountered this large stands of this grass in this beautiful this was an entrance to a beautiful botanical area between Rochester and Buffalo, New York, western New York State, home for many rare species of plants. And there's this grass. And I was trying to learn grasses at the time, so I was looking at all sorts of things, and I couldn't figure the thing out. Okay, I used the keys. I couldn't make headway, and I'm very persistent, so I spent a long time. And at first I thought it was a bromus. Well, no, it didn't work. Elemus didn't work. So what the heck was it? Well, I know no serious botanist would do this, right? None of you ever looked at pictures. But I ended up looking at pictures. And here's what the thing looks like close up at the spikelets. And I'm looking through the old Britain Brown, and there's a picture of something called Brachypodium that was listed in that book as a waif. This was a different species than this turned out to be, as a waif along seaports on the East Coast. Aha, maybe. So with the internet, I Googled around, and it turned out that on the West Coast, there is a species of Brachypodium that's highly invasive there, and covering thousands of acres in the forest, the Doug fir forest in the Pacific Northwest. So could this be this thing that is all over this rich botanical area that hundreds of botanists have walked by for I don't know how long? It looked like it. So there was a person who had published a lot in the early part of in the early 2000s on the West Coast. Well, before I get to that, it was listed in Flora of North America. And you can see on the West Coast, there's a dot in California, there's a bunch in Oregon, and there's one dot on the East Coast in Virginia. And he talks about it being, in natural areas spread by hikers, and they confirmed this report from Virginia, and that's it. And we're in western New York. So I wrote to this fellow, Tom Kay, who had published on it. I sent him some really crude pictures, and this is what he wrote back to me. This was just within a couple of days. Looks like you got it. And when I described it, he said, this seems like what we see here in the Northwest. It's fully invaded some habitats, often along trails, going into various ecological situations. It could be full sun, it could be wet, it could be dry. And what I was describing is what they were seeing there. So he made a recommendation, try to contain it, especially at trailheads. It's easily spread by deer, and certainly in the east we've got lots of deer. So it looked like it. So at that point, I was new to all this, so I sent it to our heritage botanist who sent it to my friend David Werier. But before that, he tells me, this is on the West Coast, that they started a false brome, that's the common name, working group to spread the word. And you can see it's well, maybe you can see it's small, but it's an interesting consortium. There's USDA, Forest Service, BLM, Department of Ag in Oregon, and Nature Conservancy, Native Plant Society. So a bunch of organizations working together to think about it, to research it, to do outreach. So they were taking it very seriously, and this was only in the last 10 years or so. Whoops. Yeah, and then he goes on about talking about how well this worked to spread ideas, and he felt that it slowed the spread of the species. And he ended with many thousands of acres, so it's a huge thing there. Be ashamed to see this happen in New York. Okay? So, and this is just an example of one of their outreach brochures for, you know, who looks at grasses? I mean, most botanists don't really stop and look at grasses, so you want to, you know, keep the seeds from being spread to, you know, hikers, etc., people who are using these natural areas. So it's a tough thing. So what is the status in the West? Well, you can see it was first found in Oregon in '39, but not really getting into people's consciousness when it really spread. It was probably till the 1990s. And then you can see where it came into other of the states and NBC. So a lot in the first part of this century. Listed as a noxious weed in 2 of the states and moderately invasive in California. So it's being taken pretty seriously on the West Coast. So here's what's weird. My friend and colleague David Werier, who's here in the back and is the co-author with me of this presentation, so he got forwarded the email. At that point I hadn't met David, and he says, on September 1st, I was there September 7th, he was in the same natural area, and he collected a little and he identified it. So within a week, we had both sort of found this plant that hadn't been seen before other than in Virginia. So it's kind of strange coincidence, found it independently. Also, later, after he wrote that email that day, he was looking for a house to buy, walked behind it in Ithaca, and there was the same. So is this thing more widespread than we think, and have we been all walking by it? So we don't know, but we wanted to get the word out. And even a few years before, on a field trip with the New York Flora Association, David collected this plant, this grass, and he tentatively identified it C.F. elemus. And then he sort of forgot about it. But it didn't quite fit, so he put CF, right? And there's the label, which was then annotated to Brachypodium sylvaticum in 2011. Well, yeah, he figured that out before that, after we started realizing what we had. So the plant had been around and had been misidentified in New York. We think it was in Virgin Byron in this swamp since around mid to late 90s. So we wanted to get the word out. So on the New York Flora Association blog, we put a big thing, breaking news, you know, this could be seeing what it did in the Northwest, it could be a real problem in the East. And we wrote an article for the Native Plants, Finger Lakes Native Plant Society to let people know. So hopefully more people will be looking for it. We published this in the New York Flora Association newsletter, all in '09. Even by the end of '09, the New York Invasive Plant Council rated it highly invasive, based on research that had been done mostly on the Pacific Northwest. Okay? And just last year, it's now regulated in New York State that you can't sell it, you can't grow it commercially in New York. It's on a list of protected plants. But what about in the rest of Eastern North America? Well, here you see the collection in Virginia that was the dot in the Flora of North America was from '92. But look, there's an '84 record from Michigan. That didn't make it to FNA. Why? Because it had been misidentified. A recent record from Ontario, 2011. And then since Virgin, there was one found in Syracuse and a couple more populations found in Ithaca. So that's all we know. Is it more widespread? Likely. but who's looking and who's noticing? And seeing what it does out there would be good to know. So this is just a look at the herbarium label from the Virginia record. It was collected in '92, but correctly identified in '05, and that made it into the flora of North America. This is the Michigan record. Collection was in '84. It was originally called Festuca. Looked something like a festuca. In '92, Ed Voss thought it might be a hybrid between two species of Elamis. And it wasn't until '07 that it was correctly identified by Tony Resnicek as what it was, Brachypodium sylvaticum. So you see how easy it is to confound this grass. Okay, and here's the publication for the finding in Ontario a couple of years ago. So we wanted to know, well, how did it get here? And we looked at, is it for sale currently? Was it for sale? Looked at seed catalog, records, herbarium research. In fact, last week I called this place, this was online, so you can buy 1,000 seeds for $35 today. And this nursery, or the supplier is in Michigan, and I called them, and it was a small company. I asked her where she gets the seeds, and she couldn't reveal that. Does plan to keep selling it, but it was totally unaware that it was invasive or was even restricted to be sold or in some states. So at least it is available. I don't know where they're getting it today as we speak. I'm not sure why anybody would grow it. It's not that ornamental. Okay. So we looked at seed catalog files. This is at the Bailey Hortorium at Cornell. There was no evidence that it was being sold or offered in North America for those years that the files existed, but there was ample evidence that it was sold in Europe, where it's native. Okay. But even though it wasn't sold, it was grown in botanical gardens. So in the Botanical Garden at Cornell, it was grown for several years, I believe starting in '49. In Pennsylvania, at Longwood Gardens, it was grown for probably just 1 year. It may still be grown in Missouri, but it's apparently not aggressive there because it's well tended. It doesn't seem to be escaping. So it is cultivated today. So we wanted to see, well, could this really be a problem in Eastern North America? Well, here's its native range in Eurasia, a little bit in North Africa, going a little bit into Eastern Asia. Looked at the climate that it likes, that it does well, and sort of transposed that on climates in Eastern North America. And essentially, anything that's underlined in green, it could do very well in, and most of what's underlined in yellow, it can do okay in. So it looks like, at least in terms of climate, Eastern North America could be fine for this grass to invade. Okay, so what habitats does it thrive? Well, here again, we're back to virgin, fire and swamp. Most everywhere. Okay, so great, broad ecological amplitude. Okay, it can do well in shade, forest understory, and then it can grow in full sun. It can grow in mesic, it can grow in hydric, really hydric, and it can even grow in somewhat dry soils. This is looking into this beautiful marl room, which has just this abundance of rare plants. And here's Brachypodium in the foreground. So undisturbed settings as well as along trails, which is what was mentioned. So, you know, it has a lot of potential, we think. So how do you recognize it? Since it's not in the Keys, it's not in Haines. It is listed now, I'm pretty sure it's in Michigan Flora, but it's not in Gleason and Cronquist. So that's why, you know, we want to get the word out to botanists when people are looking at plants. It's not that hard to recognize. There's a jizz for it. It's a clump former growing in, can form dense stands. It's a perennial. And look at the inflorescences. They're sort of pendulous, so it does look a little like an Elamis or a bromus, if you know those grasses, on a gross level. And that's what I first thought it was. But from July to September, so if you're walking through a woodland in that period of time, then maybe it likes richer soils. That's maybe what we see. The Michigan record and the New York records are sort of similar in that way. So here's a scan, or some scans of the inflorescence, and you see they're spike-like, but they're not sessile. They've got these short stalks. You can see it right here, and I think that's where the Brachypodium, meaning short foot, name comes from. On a very, more close-up level, the glooms are the two outer bracts. They don't have awns, but the lemma, the two bracts that enclose the actual sexual parts of the flower, the lemma does have awns. You can see that. So you'll see those long awns. And then the spikelets themselves have 5 or more florets. So it's not really that hard to identify. And then when you look at the leaves, they're usually a yellow-green, they're hairy. And at the nodes, you get backward or retrourse pointing hairs. So it's not that hard to learn to see it if you're looking at grasses. So is it a candidate? Well, we think it is, but we need to know where it is and if it really is invasive. So just a few recommendations. I think as they've done in the West, and I thought that was a great model, and I think botanical clubs could play a big part in this to strategize and plan how to respond. But let's find where the heck this thing is. It's a bit of a conundrum when a species is not super common, it's not on people's radar. But why not? Botanical clubs and maybe agencies, though took a while to get New York State to get it on their list, but they did. And form public-private partnerships. And maybe we know some populations, have experts delineate them, they're still not well mapped, and have botanists through botanical societies to search for new ones. And what is its invasive potential? We need to do more research on that. On control measures, look what's been done in Western North America. See how it applies to the East, and prioritize. That's always an issue with invasives. And make sure, like New York State did, that it's not allowed to be sold, like that little place in Michigan, and there may be others that are selling seeds. That's one way it gets around. We can stop that. And I don't know how it got to this virgin swamp, but I suspect it was by botanists traveling from the West Coast. And many just acknowledgments to various herbaria, botanical gardens, and other people that helped with information. Thank you.
We have some time for questions.
Yeah.
Are there any known control measures?
Yeah. There are, and they found some effective ones. Depending on the size, even hand pulling can be effective. Herbicide has been shown to be effective. You have to see, evaluate the situation, but yes, they have been effective. So it's a little frustrating to us to see not a whole lot happening where we see this huge thing in a rich area. Yes?
So I'm from Michigan, where it seems like invasives outnumber natives at this point, and we certainly have plenty of invasive grasses at this point. My understanding had been that most of these grasses they think were probably escaped pasture grasses, things put out for cattle to eat. Do you think that's a possible
It doesn't appear to be the case for this one. You don't see this as much in pastures the way you see many of the other non-native species. This is primarily a woodland species, so not sure how it got here. Yes.
How rhizomatous is it?
It's not too rhizomatous, yeah. Though you can see big patches, but it's mostly spreading by seed.
Okay.
Yeah, as I recall. Is that right, Dave? I think so.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm wondering if you posted those identification tips somewhere, like on a website, so people could find out
That's a
about
good
it
point.
and learn
That's a great
how to
point.
recognize
Maybe
it.
we could do that, yeah.
think that would be really useful.
Yeah, thank you, Catherine.
A
That's good.
secondary, have you gotten in touch with Prism about that? Or?
Yeah, I did a program for PRISM in last fall, and they're starting to get it on their radar. They actually produce, and PRISM is the New York State Invasive Plant Council that has different parts and represent different parts of the state, and we did see a brochure that just came out within a month or two, a little flyer. So they're starting to get it on their radar in New York. But is it here in New England? I suspect yes.